Good morning, everybody. I'm Duffy, I'm a researcher at Centre for Public Health, and what I'm going to present about isn't normally really the sort of thing that I sort of look at, but it's been a really nice diversion because normally I do criminal justice related stuff, but it was really good to have a look at what I think is quite an innovative approach. And if anything is a lesson in how things don't have to be as complicated as some people try and make them in terms of treatment for alcohol use or for drug use in this case as well. And really, the presentation is really just the hors d'oeuvre here, because I actually want to show you a video, which is really the most powerful part of this, to really give you an impression about the impact of this residential alcohol detoxification programme. And this is the lovely cottage in Wales, which is where the residential takes place. And this is actually a scheme that's run by a third sector provider called the Basement in Liverpool, who primarily provide support for homeless individuals and have a real focus on street drinkers as well. So this residential programme is specifically for street drinkers, not necessarily all homeless, but generally they are. We looked at safety, perceptions and effectiveness, but what I'm actually going to just look at is the 2 second parts of this, because I want to get to the video. So really around the perceptions of the clients and the key workers who go on the residential, and also the effectiveness that was perceived in short-term sort of effectiveness that we measured. Some very good background again to not sort of spend too long. Obviously alcohol and drug use is a significant factor in both causing and then maintaining homelessness, particularly the maintaining bit. It becomes that very cyclical thing about people not being able to actually get out of that pattern. And due to historical funding imbalances, alcohol services are generally not that available across the country, and even when they are, and actually there is a growing sort of set of alcohol services in Merseyside, street drinkers particularly find it very difficult to access these services. They have substantial barriers, and it's interesting hearing some of the barriers that we're talking about with the sort of, those of you who are talking about Vicky, I think it's actually quite similar in some ways. And there's actually very few programs that are specifically set up for this group that are massively complex needs, and I think don't play well with others sometimes is probably a reasonable way to put it, and others don't play well with them. So I think that there are some issues around that. And the programs obviously need to do more than just tackle alcohol use. They need to look at accommodation, social skills activities, but at a very, very basic level for this client group as well, because you're not talking about sort of trotting them off the job centre, plus in making sure that they get on the work programme. You're really talking about something a lot more basic in some cases. And the reality is that a substantial proportion of street drinkers are going to need detoxification at some point, and often get that in an emergency sense and don't get it really in a sort of planned sense. It's like, right, present to A&E, we're going to put you on a detox, there you go, that's it. So this was actually an attempt to try and address that. I'm sorry, I know there's a lot of text on the slide, but in response to really long waiting times and also other access problems for the street drinkers in Liverpool, they set up initially as a respite sort of thing. They were taking people away for a week's respite, and it developed beyond that. But they incorporated this residential rehab, it's not really residential rehab, a residential programme, incorporating all sorts of different sort of theoretical frameworks of the treatment, including cognitive behavioural therapy. And they take small groups, only small groups, and they're single sex, and they take them away for 14 days to 1 or 2 cottages. You saw that lovely image, it's a beautiful place where they go. And they get a week, supposedly, of reduction, and then a week of being dry. But that will vary. So you will have some people who are still on their reduction, and you'll have other people who are actually already reduced at the same time. It will depend on each individual person. It's very personalised. And it's not medically supported, and I think that's the key around this. It is not medically supported. So it sort of goes against this idea of you can't do this alone, you know, you just can't do this by reducing your drink. Obviously, not everybody's probably aware of the issues that you will have if you stop drinking, being the only sort of withdrawal that can really kill you in and of itself. What they do is they do a variety of workshops as well. They cover the things you'd expect them to do. Knowledge around unit calculations and alcohol itself, physical and social consequences they use, triggers, complementary therapy, lifestyle choices, so some general stuff and very specific stuff. They always have 3 staff for the 8 clients, so it's a really good client-staff ratio as well. But it's not 24-hour medical monitoring, that is not where it's at. They do have nurses coming in on every day to make sure that any medical needs are, and they've got links in local GPs and stuff if anybody needs prescribing, so they have obviously opiate users who need their methadone, so they have that link as well. Critical for me is a 6 weeks preparation stage, and in that preparation stage the clients really discuss their fears about detox, because this is a really frightening thing for people, especially because quite a lot of these people haven't necessarily been through any sort of treatment before. So they get a chance to actually sort of, if you like, voice those fears and have a discussion with other people. And this preparation stage is actually done as a group as well. It's not done in isolation. So there's some work with individual key workers and volunteers at the basement, but there's stuff done in the group as well. They get a chance to get a full medical checkup, and that can't be undersold in terms of what that actually gives, because most of these groups won't actually have any regular non-medical, non-emergency medical contact. And they do a drink diary, and that is what's used to construct the reduction regime. So that's the key thing really, and that's based on, over that 6 weeks, doing a drink diary, having a discussion, and coming up with a consensus between the individual and their key worker about what they're actually going to do. We would basically look and see how they perceive the scheme, gather some really basic quantitative data around the outcomes, and those in the short terms, and really this third point was quite integral, was around developing the foundations for them to go on and actually sort of evaluate their own programme, because with anything like this, it's been given sort of not on a shoestring, but sort of, you know, it's something that they've very much gone out and done on their own. It's not massively backed by huge levels of commissioning or anything. They really need to develop a way of sort of demonstrating the effectiveness of the programme. And the video that I'm going to show you to some degree is the first start of that process, if you like. We did interviews with the clients in week 1 and week 2. We did interviews with the staff, observations in week 1 and week 2, and obviously this field work, I should give my thanks to Alan McGee, who conducted the field work and actually gave me some really valuable feedback from the observations, because the change in the clients that he saw was massively dramatic. We did some client questionnaires which they completed before they went away, and then when they got back, and that was meant to be the basis for them then taking that forward in terms of whether they wanted to use that as an ongoing evaluation tool. And that really covered consumption, well-being, their perceptions of control, and how positive they were about their ability to move forward. Something about characteristics, and really what I'm trying to do here is emphasise just how complex these cases are. These are not just people who like a drink. These are people who have massively complex needs and have long-standing issues. So most of them drank daily, well, all of them drank on a daily or almost daily basis. All of them had or did have concurrent issues with illicit drugs, so it's not a complex substance use picture. Only one resident at the time that they went away had their own accommodation. They had a massive range of physical health and mental health issues, the ones I suppose you'd expect. You had sort of cardiovascular issues, liver issues, depression, anxiety, but really contact with any sort of constructive mental health service was almost non-existent. 3 of them had absolutely no previous treatment experience, which, considering the amount of times they've probably actually come into contact with emergency care, is quite an interesting finding as well. And they felt themselves they had a complete lack of insight into their problems. And that, combined with a lack of awareness of services generally, meant they just hadn't engaged properly in the past. So even when they had engaged, they didn't really have an insight into why they were engaging and what they needed to do to actually tackle that. So it's really complex cases. Their perceptions were quite surprising in some ways. Detox is not necessarily a pleasant process, particularly for sort of high-level dependent drinkers, but they found it easy even. A lot of the quotes revolved around sort of, it wasn't that bad, I was really worried about it when I went in, and they said everybody says the same thing, the way they cut down the alcohol, it's been so easy physically to do. So even though there was no pharmacological support to this process, they actually found it quite easy to do. There were really positive perceptions of the programme in general. The environment and location, it's beautiful. So I mean, you know, and a respite from being on the street most of the time in city centre Liverpool is probably a fair bit of contrast for people. So I mean, that was really positive. The levels of care and support and the commitment to the staff were praised. So again, the relationship between the residents and the staff who were there supporting them was really, really strong. And obviously that's really conducive to having people actually make positive progress. And the programme of activities was praised, and I'm going to come on to that a little bit. They really felt that the sessions provided confidence, and this was, come back to this again about a major output around the confidence of the individuals who were there, and not just have I stopped drinking, their actual confidence in themselves, their self-esteem, and also having some coping strategies, because obviously a lot of sort of, if you like, inpatient detoxification is very much, you're in a hospital, you get detoxed, you go out, not necessarily with the best set of aftercare that you can have. But in this case, they felt they had coping strategies as well. Pictures of them doing one of the groups there. And I think this quote sort of sums that up in terms of, you know, they've tried to actually, they've got some insight from the groups instead of just automatically turning to the idea of alcohol being a coping mechanism. They had one-to-one sessions, and they all felt that that was critical, because while the groups were good for exploring the starts of things, often really complex things came up that they couldn't really cover in the group, or maybe they didn't feel comfortable in the group, so they'd get one-to-one sessions separately, and they felt that was really, really important. And interestingly, if you put 8 people in a controlled environment during a really stressful situation, you would expect that at some point somebody would want to leave, get on at somebody else, to be roused, but actually they all reported that the relationships, not only between the key workers and the residents, but also the residents themselves, was really, really positive. And they felt that that was partly down to the fact that there was this real balance between recreation and proper work. It wasn't just going away to go and, like, you know, float around in the North Wales hills for a while. It was actually, there was proper work, but it was mixed with an ability to actually create some bonds between them. Bonds that are probably, in some cases, had developed previously and had developed through the 6 weeks, but then were made stronger by effective group work. And just generally, and I just felt this sort of the best detox I've ever done sort of thing. I love that quote. But so they were overwhelmingly positive generally about the program. As I said, one of the critical things about detox, and it happens with anything, it happens with prison, it happens with any sort of treatment, is around the aftercare. And one of the key things around this is that there is a personalised aftercare program that started to develop in the 6 weeks before they go away. It's not something that they do in the artificial environment, they start to do it before they go away. So you have a very long time period to try and develop that program. And they have links to all the services it requires, sort of housing, education, and also to any ongoing treatment if they feel they need anything like that, things like counselling. But what they did report, and what the staff particularly reported, was that there are ongoing issues because a lot of this client group have histories with the agencies, and those agencies are really not generally that keen to take them back on board sometimes. And I was there last week actually for service, and they were talking about how actually they've got really good relationships now with the agencies, so they can actually show that the residential has a positive outcome, and that the clients that come out of the residential are in a fixed state to be able to engage properly in treatment. That's quite an important thing in terms of trust between the agencies. I think that one of the critical things is about some form of residential rehab or supported accommodation when they come back, so they're not going into the same unstable situations, and everybody on this particular residential had that. But they were also very aware that probably they'd done the easy bit, that actually the point when they were away in North Wales was actually easy, and the reality is that their confidence is probably going to hit a little bit of a wall when they get back to Liverpool, and they were all quite aware of that. And I think that's what makes the other stuff really important, because they've got something there, and they said specifically that because I've got things in place, I have more confidence about that, whereas normally I'd be thinking, oh God, I'm going to go back on the street, there's no way I'm going to maintain this. So quickly some stuff about service outcomes. It wasn't necessarily the sort of point of why I went into this presentation today, but when we did follow them up, after 6 of the 8 clients hadn't had a drink in the 3 weeks following. So actually, even though abstinence isn't one of the major things, 6 of them have maintained that. For this group, even that 3-week period is a massive achievement. They had improvements in their confidence. They also felt that they had an alternative, and they felt that this alternative to their life was a critical outcome for the service. And I think you can sort of see some of that here in terms of, I know there's only 6 people in the group and everything, and it's a bit of a random graph to show up, but at the end of the day you had only one person feeling their control of their life, and nobody felt that they had a stable life in a positive direction, and that completely changed at the second stage. get into anything about it's significant or not, we've got 2 people missing and all that. It's just to give an impression of where we were going. Interestingly, I think probably this last sort of set bars probably demonstrates the fact that that 6-week sort of period beforehand does actually get people motivated to change, because they all felt that they actually would be able to stick to their plans before they went away. But interestingly, when they got back, they all felt after 3 weeks, even then, they were still going to have a positive and lasting impact on them after they got back. So even once they're back in that uncertainty, they still felt that they had a chance to actually make a change. The respite angle, even though the scheme did used to focus on that and now doesn't, was still thought to be really, really important. And these two I thought particularly powerful quotes about the fact that it's actually saved their life. They felt they were at a crisis point, and this has actually set them on their way, which also makes the findings about their continued abstinence even more staggering, I think, because people were thinking they were on the verge of dying at the point that they went in, and then 3 weeks later, 6 of them are still abstinent. So I think that's really, the turning around is quite critical. And I think, again, I mentioned the health service access. That's just so important for them, because it'll be the first access. So those are sort of some of the outcomes that provisionally it looks like the scheme's working towards. This is very dull, I know, to talk about figures and everything and put figures on, but one of the things that obviously will be something like this in the current climate is around, is it comparable to other services? And I think it compares really well. If you look, it's 10,000 per residential for everything. And so that's, you know, sort of £1.25 per person for that 2-week period. And I think it compares really favourably to the other more, you know, more traditional routes in. So it's not more expensive. And I think the critical point is this is dealing with the most complex cases. All of those other services will deal with a range of individuals, both from people with relatively small levels of complexity right up to the top end, whereas this, for that value, is dealing with these most complex clients. And as it is, the sort of evidence base around a lot of residential and patient treatment is a bit hit and miss in the country. So I think it's starting to build up an evidence base for this. It's good. I've only got a little bit of time left. I'm not going to draw any conclusions. I'm going to allow you to draw your own conclusions from the video here. Because I've sort of covered most of the conclusions really, but I wanted you to see this, and I don't want it to go on beyond the time that you know, I'm going to shout at me because I'll cry. So I'm going to show you 2 of the 3 videos that are on here, so it'll be about sort of 7 or 8 minutes. I saw 3 of the gentlemen who were on the residential on Thursday last week, just wandering around town, and they look fantastic, including the first thing that was on here. He looks like he's put on about a stone and looks really healthy when I saw him last week, and that's a year after he went on the residential, so really, really quite, I found it quite